My opening remarks on Friday, I mentioned that Euro-Atlantic security and Indo-Pacific security are not just interdependent, but codependent. And I think running through the theme of discussions from Prime Minister Kishida of Japan's remarks in the evening, through all of today, including, of course, President Zelensky's remarks, and the questions posed this morning to the Chinese Defense Minister, we've confirmed the validity of that maxim, and we have here an opportunity to examine it in more detail with our three speakers who will be speaking under the theme Common Challenges for Asia-Pacific and European Defense. Our first speaker, and I'll introduce them first in order, and then they will address us, is Jong-Sup, who's recently assumed the position of Minister of National Defense in the Republic of Korea following the recent elections. IISS is proud to have received so many defense ministers who've only been recently appointed to their posts following the democratic processes in their country, and then have an opportunity to meet for the first time at this dialogue. We're delighted to have Kajsa Ollongren, the Minister of Defense of the Netherlands. The Netherlands has a long history of relations with this region. Therefore, it's a surprise for me to recollect that, in fact, she is the first defense minister of the Netherlands to address the Shangri-La dialogue, but better late than never, and I'm sure this will now not be the first time, but the beginning of a series of commitments to the Shangri-La dialogue, a commitment that the Netherlands officially made in its Indo-Pacific guidelines that it published last year. And delighted to have a senior parliamentarian on the panel this morning, Lord Sedwill. He was the former Cabinet Secretary in the UK, National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Johnson, and in that role played a very major role in defining the UK's Indo-Pacific tilt, and also balancing out in looking at our national security strategy, how the UK security establishment could meet its commitments in a variety of theatres, the European, the Middle Eastern, the Indo-Pacific, and some enduring commitments it still has in some other parts of the world. So we have three excellent panelists to examine in detail this theme, and I'll invite first to the podium the Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Korea. Thank you, sir.
Distinguished guests, it is my great pleasure to join defense ministers and security experts from all over the world here at the internationally recognized Shangri-La Dialogue, one of the largest security conferences in the world. Allow me to offer my special thanks to IISS Director General and Chief Executive Dr. John Chipman and his team, and Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Singapore, His Excellency Teo Chee-Hean, for their many efforts to resume the Shangri-La dialogue following a 2-year hiatus from the COVID pandemic. I am excited to deliver a speech on the denuclearization of North Korea and the security of the Indo-Pacific region at this profound occasion. Our government of the Republic of Korea, that newly took office last month has laid out a global pivotal state initiative to play a responsible role for freedom, peace, and prosperity beyond the Korean Peninsula to the Indo-Pacific region and the world. Distinguished guests, let me take this opportunity to share with you the security landscape on the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific region, as well as the role of the Republic of Korea as a global pivotal state. Today, the Indo-Pacific region is drawing the attention of the entire world. The Indo-Pacific is home to half of the world population, accounting for 2/3 of international trade. Major military powers around the world are also located in the region. And as such, nations of the region, including European countries, are seeking to enhance their presence in the Indo-Pacific through various economic and security consultative mechanisms. In such circumstances, instability in the Indo-Pacific region can leave an enormous impact on global economy and international security order. Furthermore, Republic of Korea's political, economic, and cultural status, as well as the distinctive geopolitical character of the Korean Peninsula, are inseparable from the stability in the Indo-Pacific region. This means instability on the Korean Peninsula can lead to instability in Northeast Asia and in the overall Indo-Pacific region. The international community pointed out North Korea's nuclear and missile program as one of the major challenges that destabilize the Indo-Pacific and is closely coordinating to head off such challenges. The ROK-US alliance is also dedicating its utmost efforts, leveraging all available efforts and assets to deter North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. Yet, unfortunately, North Korea is behaving in a way that betrays our expectations. And now, its nuclear and missile threats have become more than a simple threat. From short-range to intercontinental ballistic missiles, North Korea's repeated missile provocations are advancing in quantity and quality, not to mention its preparations to conduct the 7th nuclear test. This is a grave challenge, threatening peace and stability of not only the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific region, but also the international community. North Korea's nuclear and missile provocations are clear violations of UN Security Council resolutions that the international community agreed upon and breaking existing agreements from the Inter-Korean and US DPRK summits. If North Korea continues its provocations, the security of Northeast Asia and the region will be further destabilized, which will also negatively affect the stability of the Indo-Pacific. Meanwhile, our government will not give up its goal to establish peace on the Korean Peninsula through the denuclearization of North Korea. Our goal to denuclearize North Korea in a complete, verifiable manner, and our principle to establish a sustainable peace on the Korean Peninsula will remain firm and robust. To this end, we will set forth clear, corresponding measures with the international community to pursue the denuclearization of North Korea. And to echo President Yoon's remarks, should North Korea make substantial progress in denuclearization throughout the course of such endeavors, our government will pursue a bold plan that can yield groundbreaking improvements for North Korea's economy and its citizens' quality of life. With that said, we need to support all this plan from a position of strength. And to this end, our government will strengthen capabilities to better implement the U.S. extended deterrence and will dramatically enhance response capabilities of the Republic of Korea military to deter North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. And moreover, we seek to strengthen ROK US Japan trilateral security cooperation to respond to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. While many bilateral issues remain unresolved between the Republic of Korea and Japan, we not only intend to have the two sides put their wisdom together to reach reasonable solutions in a way that is in line with the two countries' shared interests, but also intend to engage in a serious dialogue with Japan, not just to normalize ROK-Japan security cooperation, but also to strengthen ROK-US-Japan trilateral security cooperation. And as a matter of fact, we held our first ROK-US-Japan trilateral defense ministerial meeting in 2 years and 7 months. During our trilateral meeting, we mainly discussed options to respond to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. We also held our first ROK-PRC defense ministerial meeting in 2 years and 7 months. Both sides pledged to work together for new ROK-PRC relations based on spirits of mutual respect and cooperation. In particular, the two sides shared a common view in the need to enhance strategic communication for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. During the ROK-US summit last May, our government announced that Korea will formulate its own Indo-Pacific strategy framework. And through this announcement, the Republic of Korea made it clear that it will now go beyond its diplomacy that was focused on Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asian affairs to play its necessary role as a global pivotal state. This is not a nearsighted response. Rather, it is a commitment aimed at playing a global role, with a firm ground on our long-term vision. And to this end, allow me to elaborate, as the Defense Minister, several initiatives for our government's regional security contribution. First, security cooperation with ASEAN is an important key agenda for our government. Therefore, we will expand cooperation in more domains more proactively while respecting ASEAN's centrality. We will dedicate our efforts so that our government's participation in multilateral consultative bodies, including ADMM+, ARF, and Shangri-La dialogue, can result in tangible contributions. To this end, we will engage in joint response against non-traditional security threats, such as cyber threats and terrorism, threats that ASEAN is facing in reality. Also, we will look into defense industry cooperation and other various options together to strengthen maritime security capabilities with ASEAN member states. Second, our government is a key partner for security cooperation, forging partnership with multiple nations of the region, including European countries, and as such will proactively expand cooperation with all nations on and off the region that seek to cooperate with us, not only for traditional areas of security cooperation such as maritime security, but also for non-traditional areas of security cooperation. And third, based on principles of openness, transparency, and inclusiveness, we seek to expand cooperation with various security consultative bodies that are currently active in the Indo-Pacific region. We can say that ultimate purpose of unilateral and multilateral consultative bodies, such as ROK-ASEAN cooperation and Quad, is to faithfully implement rules-based international order in the Indo-Pacific region. The Republic of Korea will seek to play a constructive role as a global pivotal state, so that rather than ruling out a certain country, it can unlock the greatest amount of security benefits for the greatest number of countries. Even as of right now, the level of tensions on the Korean Peninsula remains higher than any other place in the world, with continued confrontations between South and North Korea. And put in this situation, we cannot help but have mixed feelings as we watch the reality of Ukraine unfold. An invasion cannot be justified under any circumstances. I sincerely hope peace can return again to Ukraine soon. I also hope North Korea can promptly cease its nuclear and missile program so that real peace can be established on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you for listening.
Minister, thank you very much for giving us a sense of the new government's approach to the challenge of DPRK's nuclear weapons program, and I'm sure there will be questions from the audience as to what diplomacy and in what format should be conducted to contain and then ultimately diminish and entirely disarm DPRK's nuclear weapons program, which does indeed have impact throughout the world, not just in the Korean Peninsula or in this region. With that, could I invite the Minister of the Netherlands to address this plenary of the Shangri-La Dialogue? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chipman. Dear colleagues, generals, admirals, all participants of the Shangri-La Dialogue, it's an honor and a privilege to speak to you today, to discuss common challenges for the Indo-Pacific, and to exchange views with academics and professional analysts at this important geopolitical forum. It's of course also a great pleasure to be here in Singapore on this occasion after 2 years of COVID pandemic. This dialogue is taking place again more or less like we were used to do. And I say more or less because my friend and dear colleague, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Mr. Josep Borrell, regrettably cannot be here. He would like to deliver his remarks here on the podium with us, but due to COVID, he's had to cancel his appearance here this morning, and he has asked me to deliver also his key messages. And of course, as an EU member state, and also as a fierce supporter of his views on the global role of the EU, I am just proud to do so. First of all, let me thank IISS and Singapore for giving me this opportunity to speak here today, and also, of course, for your hospitality in organizing this event. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in interesting times, and that is meant as ironically as it sounded. I'm also glad that the IISS asked us to speak about common challenges for Asia-Pacific and European defense, because that is indeed the right framing. Europe and Asia have a shared stake in each other's security. Putin's territorial war shows how our continents are connected. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a global challenge with global ramifications. And these ramifications bring global responsibilities. Neutrality is not possible. Furthermore, Europe is drawing lessons from the war against Ukraine. This makes European countries and the EU better partners for Asia too. And let me start with condemning this illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by a UN Security Council member. This invasion has changed the global security situation fundamentally. There is no far away. A war in one part of the world affects people across the globe. The war in Ukraine has already affected all of us, also people far beyond the European continent. From scarce energy supplies and rising prices to bare shelves in our supermarkets. And if we fail to secure the export of Ukraine's grain and its harvest that's coming on, the entire world will have to face grave consequences as a food crisis looms. The whole world risks stagflation, global security, and the global economy are at risk. And all because of Putin's war. The demolition of Ukraine's critical infrastructure, including grain silos, the blockade of Odessa. It's all due to the war, not to our sanctions. So what's at stake? The same rules for all, based on international law within the UN Charter at its core. It makes states secure, people free, and companies willing to invest. In short, our rule-based way of life, that's what's at stake. And we must protect it together. The way the international community now chooses to respond will not only affect the stability and security in Europe, but it will determine the future of the rules-based international order of freedom and prosperity across the globe. Speaking out together is crucial to protect these common values. Development in the Indo-Pacific region also have growing impact on our global prosperity and collective security. As the oceans are the arteries of the global economy, the Indo-Pacific region is crucial in this regard. The seas need to be freely accessible to all, and that requires action by all of us collectively to uphold rule-based international order. We have begun to look beyond our own region, and we're ready to face the reality that regional threat landscapes are increasingly connected across borders, across continents. A paradigm shift has taken place towards recognizing global threats using a 360 degrees approach. Threats countries in Asia have been facing more consciously. Your experience can thus provide us with valuable lessons, also in Europe, because we are indeed drawing lessons. Putin has brought us together as never before. European countries have stepped up their game to provide security against present and future threats. And his actions have woken up the EU to its geopolitical role and the importance of defense cooperation. The EU has adopted the strategic compass as our operational guide to develop the EU into a stronger and more capable security provider. European nations are increasing their defense budgets. All this will make European armed forces stronger, but it will also make us better partners for security cooperation with Asia. Last year, our Dutch frigate, Everton, was part of the UK carrier strike group, and she also docked here in Singapore. Her presence is a demonstration to our commitment to the region and our readiness to defend our shared values and interests. And we plan to send a ship to the Indo-Pacific region once every 2 years to show our commitment. And I see how much great potential for cooperation there is in this rapidly changing and sometimes disruptive world. Open and accessible cyberspace is crucial for our trade and communication. But cyberspace is haunted by pirates and mines too. We should respond by fiercely working together to protect it. The EU Indo-Pacific strategy provides a foundation upon which to work with our Indo-Pacific partners, also in the field of security. Work is underway, but we have to make it as concrete as possible. In a world where not everyone plays by the same rules, countries from Europe and throughout the Indo-Pacific need each other and should work together to uphold a world based on agreed rules and international laws, not might make right. In closing, as I said, we're living in interesting times, less ironically perhaps this time. Power structures are shifting and power bases are broadening. Our efforts to protect our common values and to promote stability and security are more effective when done together. And I say this also on behalf of my colleague Josep Borrell and on behalf of the European Union. In the face of the current armed aggression, neutrality is not an option. No one wishes to see similar aggression beyond Europe in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister, for those remarks, for reminding us that the regional threat landscapes are increasingly connected. When the President of the EU Commission took her office, she referred to her wish to make it a geopolitical commission. There were perhaps early doubts as to whether that could be effectively operated, but there's no question now that the EU is playing a very geopolitical role, and often commission-led. And glad also that you were able to weave into your remarks some of the thoughts of the High Representative, Josep Borrell, who very sadly couldn't be with us today, but I hope you will relay back to him personally our hope. Espero que su recuperación sería rápido. We hope that his recovery will be fast. And you mentioned in your concluding passages that your Dutch ship joined the UK carrier strike force when it made its tour of the region. I think an indicator of a general policy attitude that the European presence in the Indo-Pacific is best offered in a combined and joint effort where possible. And so with that, could I invite Lord Sedwill to address this plenary. Thank you very much. What?
John, colleagues, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to join you and address you this morning. Can I also, as a British parliamentarian, extend my thanks also to the government and people of Singapore for a warm and generous welcome as we've returned to the IISS Shangri-La dialogue in person this year, the first of its kind for a couple of years, as we've heard. It's very good to be here. Thank you. When I first became National Security Advisor, in my first year in that job, I visited Beijing more often than I visited Washington, and I visited Japan, the Republic of Korea, Singapore, India, Australia, and New Zealand more than I visited some European nations. Now, that wasn't just because of Brexit, although Brexit Britain, of course, had to be global Britain to prosper, and to do so, we had to deepen our relationships in this part of the world, which, as we've already heard, amounts to half the global population, over a third of the global economy, 2/3 of global trade. But it was also because the acute political crisis, geopolitical crisis of that time was, once again, the DPRK, at the time developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, which they could apply a nuclear warhead to, that could have reached the continental United States, and the clear risks of nuclear escalation that arose from that. You might ask why a British National Security Advisor was so involved in that issue. Well, apart from our role as a member of the Security Council, those of you who've done geography will remember the world is round, and Berlin is closer to Pyongyang than Seattle. London is closer than Los Angeles. It was perhaps the most acute example of how a geopolitical crisis in this part of the world is also a geopolitical crisis and threat in the European theatre. And as we've heard already from the Dutch Defence Minister and others over the past couple of days, the geopolitical crisis from the Russian aggression in Ukraine risks causing geopolitical crises elsewhere through the transmission mechanism of food and energy insecurity. Nations in the Middle East, in Africa, and in Asia are highly dependent upon Ukrainian and Russian grain and food oils for their own food security. That is not just a question for them of inflation, but of shortages. And as we know, food shortages lead to political instability. We've seen the same, of course, with COVID and with climate change. The G7 panel on global economic resilience that I chaired in 2021 concluded that the next major crisis is as likely to arise from a combination of environmental, socioeconomic, and geopolitical shocks as it is from a single source crisis like the COVID crisis. If national security 1.0 of the 20th century was essentially the defense of the nation, and by the way, that's become more complex in the modern era because we don't just have the traditional domains of land, sea, and air, but the new domains of space, cyberspace, and the information space. And national security 2.0 added to that the need to tackle non-state threats such as terrorism, transnational crime, and subversion. Then national security 3.0, as we face now, adds to those challenges environmental, economic, and human security for the reasons that we've set out. Now, there is a temptation, and many populists succumb to this, that the answer to the alignment between our national security interests and global security interests is to reverse course. Reduce interdependencies, pull up the drawbridge, turn back the clock, retreat from globalization, drift towards protectionism, with the inevitable result of fragmentation and, as we've already heard, economic stagflation. As the panel I chaired concluded, improving economic resilience requires two things: sound economic policies at home to promote growth, productivity, investment, and skills, plus collective action to tackle market concentrations, weaknesses in supply chains, and overdependence. And that includes, as we go through the green transition over the next quarter century to achieve net zero by the middle part of this century. It would be a mistake to replace overdependence on fossil fuels with overdependence on single sources for the critical minerals and other capabilities that we're going to require for the technological revolution and the green transition. And the measures we'll need to take will be of a scale and scope similar to those we needed to take after the OPEC crises of the 1970s. Those same 2 points apply to defense and national security. We need to strengthen our national capabilities and act collectively and effectively together. We've heard a lot, including from the American Defense Secretary yesterday, about partnership. But partnership must mean partnership. That means sharing the burden, not simply sheltering under the capabilities of others. I was involved in producing the UK's National Security Capability Review of 2017, and although it came out after my time at the beginning of the Integrated Review of 2021. And the headline of that, as we've heard, was a tilt to the Indo-Pacific, but underlying that tilt were some quite important new concepts. The fusion doctrine, whereby a country like the UK applies our defense, diplomatic, development, and economic capabilities, national capabilities, to our defense, diplomatic, economic goals and aims and interests. And the allied by design concept, which we saw vividly with the deployment of CSG, the Carrier Strike Group, in 2021, that for a nation, still the fifth largest defense budget in the world, but a nation that is always going to operate with allies, we need to design that concept in from the start. And we saw that with the deployment of the Carrier Strike Group, as we've heard, with Dutch, Japanese, Australian, American, and other forces deployed as part of it. The G7 panel also concluded that in order to facilitate a collective approach, we needed to show real solidarity among allies and partners. And that means more self-discipline. Not using national security measures in our domestic trade and investment legislation against allies. Operating more collectively and effectively in the global institutions, including the global institutions that govern the world economy. And acting together against economic crises or economic coercion. Some nations that have faced that have felt pretty lonely over the past few years. There are important dividing lines, but the important dividing line is not between authoritarian and democratic states, vital though those distinctions are. We're only going to form genuinely deep alliances and partnerships with countries that share our values. But we can do business and find common cause with countries with very different political systems. The key is not the distinction between democracies and authoritarian governments, but between those who accept the global rule of law, respect the sovereignty of smaller nations, and those like Vladimir Putin who operate the law of the jungle and infringe them. In this region, we've heard from both the United States and China. And we heard yesterday from the Australian Defence Minister of how they intend to approach their relationship with the People's Republic. There are significant differences between us. There are areas that, as Western democracies, we will have to contest. There are many areas in a free and open Indo-Pacific where free and open competition is the right approach. But there are other areas where it is vital that we cooperate, notably on the major environmental challenges of our time. In the same year that the UK hosted the COP26 conference on climate change, China hosted as important a conference on biodiversity, which could be the next big threat to food security. Whatever phrase you want to give that, détente with Chinese characteristics, we knew peaceful coexistence, we need to find a way of doing business with each other. The UK is committed to this region. I'm no longer in government, but the UK is genuinely committed to this region because it is in our national interest. And that commitment is persistent. We will be deploying more forces into this region in order to support our interests and those of our allies. We will continue to conduct freedom of navigation operations, joint and combined exercises with partners here, counter-piracy operations, sanctions enforcement, and alongside that, political engagement within the UN. We're also seeking to deepen our economic ties by acceding to the CPTPP, and I'm told the negotiations for that are going well. There is a question about whether more formal structures need to be reinforced as well. We've heard already that a nation NATO is not appropriate to this part of the world, but that isn't the only model. And we can refresh the Five Powers Defence Agreement. We have the new agreement, AUKUS, between the UK, US, and Australia. We have the UK's new structured dialogue with ASEAN, and there are other fora as well, the Quad and others that we have already heard. Another feature of our presence in this region is a new approach to industrial and defence technical cooperation. In the past, we've tended to develop systems for our own needs and in our own theatre, and then seek to sell them to partners and allies around the world. We're moving to a new approach of genuine co-design and co-production, including with allies and partners in this part of the world. A couple of examples, the work with Australia on the Type 26 and with Japan on the Future Combat Air System. So, John, in answer to the exam question of this session, I agree with you. These are not just common challenges in the sense that they're the same but in separate parts of the world. These are common challenges because they are connected. We need to take collective action on the geopolitical, economic, and environmental threats and challenges. We need a common approach between allies and partners to reinforcing our defence and security cooperation with trade and investment relationships. We need collective investment in genuine partnership, co-designed and co-produced defence and technical capabilities. And we need a common resolve to protect and promote our shared values and interests in a period which, as we've already heard, can be described best as, or most moderately perhaps, as a period of interesting times. Final point I'd make is this. One capability that we genuinely have is our alliances and partnerships. And it's not one our adversaries enjoy. It's important we nurture that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for bringing out the geoeconomic elements of geostrategy, the importance of the right kind of economic statecraft, weaving in the climate change impact on national and international security, and finally reminding us, if I can coin this phrase, of the need for smart partnership. With that, let's turn to some questions and comments from the floor. I have a dozen or so. I will ask 6 or 7 of them to start and then perhaps come back to the panel. Could I begin with Bastian Giegowitz from Germany and the IISS? Bastian.
John, thank you very much. My question is for the two speakers from the NATO nations. In 2.5 weeks or so, NATO will adopt, presumably, a new strategic concept. What will, should, can it credibly say about the Indo-Pacific in the context of Russia's war of aggression in Europe and the persistent threat that Russia poses to European and Euro-Atlantic security? Thank you.
Thanks very much. And from Malaysia, Chu Ping Hu.
Thank you, Dr. Chairman. So I would like to ask about the Smart Power Partnership to Minister of Defense Lee Jong-Sup. I'm glad to hear that there is going to be a defense cooperation with ASEAN member states. So you mentioned about more domains to be included. Would you consider peace process on the Korean Peninsula to be part of this expanding security cooperation domain? And to Lord Sedwill, would the UK's Indo-Pacific tilt be a form of converged interest with South Korea's Indo-Pacific tilt as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from India, Krishnan Nair.
Many East Asian leaders often express the view, not in public but in Chatham House settings, that the competition, the ongoing competition and rivalry between the United States and China in the Asian theater give them more flexibility, wiggle room, and choices. This is a luxury which countries in this region did not have during the old Cold War Soviet years. For them at that time, Moscow was definitely the other side. Would the panel factor in this situation among the common challenges for Asia Pacific in the context of European defense interests?
Thank you very much. And from the Republic of Korea, Wong Gi-cho.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question to Korean Defense Minister, Mr. Lee. As you mentioned, President Yoon announced at the summit meeting with Joe Biden last month that he will formulate Korea's new Indo-Pacific strategy, and you emphasized that Korean government will increase security engagement in the Indo-Pacific, which has been a missing link in Korea's regional policy in the past. So my question is to you, what would be the major security components of Korea's new Indo-Pacific strategy, especially with regard to regional security issues such as South China Sea? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Australia, Natasha Kassam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chipman, and thanks to all the panelists today. My question is for Minister Lee. We've heard in great detail over the past day and a half the views of the Chinese, American, and Japanese ministers about Taiwan. I'd like to ask you about how Korea sees Taiwan's security and what role Taiwan will play in Korea's new Indo-Pacific strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Germany, but also the IISS, the Executive Director of our office in Berlin, Germany, Ben Schreier.
Thank you. Thank you, John. My question goes to Minister Ollongren. Minister, thank you very much for your speech. Can I please ask for your thoughts on General Wei's address this morning? It seems that China's position on Ukraine, Russia, South China Sea, but also Taiwan does fundamentally not align with European and EU positions. Does the EU and European powers need to further reassess their responses to China's challenge? Thank you.
And from China, Xi Zhang.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman. My question is for Mr. Lee, Defense Minister of South Korea. In the past 4 decades, Asia is the most peaceful region in the world, while the tension between NATO and Russia caused chaos and conflicts in Europe. Nowadays, NATO is stepping into Asia. South Korea is expanding cooperation with NATO and has joined some institutions under NATO. So my question is, do you think such activities might bring chaos and conflicts to Asia? or affect the centrality of ASEAN in the region? Thank you.
I might take one or two more before coming back to the panel from the US and Keith Panda.
Thank you. My question is for Minister Lee. Minister Lee, you emphasized the importance of deterring North Korea. And of course, when we talk of deterrence, we talk of specific scenarios. And one of the most important scenarios, I think, is averting nuclear weapons use by North Korea. To this end, South Korea has made significant improvements in its own defensive capabilities, including the adoption of many precision strike platforms. Could you speak about the role of the preemptive use of these capabilities and the use of these capabilities potentially to strike the North Korean leadership? And if you have any concerns that this type of doctrinal planning could cause scenarios where North Korea might resort to nuclear use where it otherwise may not have. Thank you.
Sorry, just to clarify, your point was about which country's policy? Got it. And one more, John Rain from the UK and also the IISS. John.
Thank you, John. We heard yesterday from President Zelensky speaking from an undisclosed location because his country is at war. So whatever else we achieve in Ukraine, what we haven't achieved is deterring Russia. So my question is, what now constitutes effective deterrence?
Thank you very much. And with that, I'll come back to the panel, giving them each a couple of minutes, perhaps the Republic of Korea Minister an extra minute, given the questions asked to him, but we'll do it in reverse order, if that's all right. So Mark, if you could respond, perhaps beginning with John's last question and then moving on. How do we deter Russia?
Well, I think Russia has probably been partly deterred for the future by the failure of their campaign in Ukraine. We weren't able to deter it, you're right, John, but Ukraine isn't a NATO ally, and governments made clear that that meant that the Article 5 guarantee, which essentially implies military action in support of a country that's attacked, didn't apply to Ukraine. But the failure of Russia's campaign, I think, has actually shifted the strategic picture in Europe quite significantly. For the whole of the Cold War, the presumption essentially was that Russian conventional superiority meant that NATO might have to resort to the first use of nuclear weapons. That was always at least an option available to us. And with the accession, we hope, of Finland and Sweden soon to NATO as well, bolstering, these are really significant military powers, bolstering the capabilities, the military capabilities of NATO, then we should realize that we can actually not just deter, but defend Western Europe against a Russian conventional attack. And that's quite a new position to find ourselves in. We've thought of deterrence in the past. We should now be thinking about defense. That's going to mean quite a significant reshaping of the deployment of NATO forces, NATO commands. And I think that goes to the first question about the strategic concept. NATO is fundamentally a defensive alliance. It's fundamentally focused, the clues in the title, on the North Atlantic. But NATO nations and the EU, as we've already heard, have strategic interests in the rest of the world. And NATO should be working with other partners elsewhere to promote global security, including developing capabilities, exercising together, conducting counter-piracy operations, and so on. But fundamentally, NATO remains a defensive alliance focused on the North Atlantic theatre, rather than a vehicle for its members to extend their influence elsewhere. And that distinction, I think, is quite important.
Minister?
Well, thank you. Just to add to what Mark just said, because I agree, I think that the first response after the invasion was, of course, unity. In very many ways, NATO unity, European unity, European Union unity, and also in the UN. So condemning the invasion, condemning the aggression, the unprovoked and illegal war. And this unity is important, but that was a starting point, I think. And the other thing is NATO, if I can talk a little bit about NATO also, not only about the EU, immediately strengthened its posture on the eastern flank, really immediately, only hours after the invasions. The fighter jets were up on the eastern flank. So, and that strengthening has been continued afterwards. And of course, and that's what I wanted to say about the strategic concept. The strategic concept is not only looking at the current war in Ukraine, and it shouldn't, because it has to be our strategy for the next 10 years. And it's very important to have this 360-degree approach, where we do take into consideration, of course we have to, the Russian aggression and the threat that it poses to NATO, which is a defensive alliance, of course. But there is more than that, I'm afraid. So we also look at terrorism. We also have to look at the climate change and the effects of climate change. Personally, I think that if we have this summit already in 2 weeks' time in Madrid, we have applications from Sweden and Finland. We have a completely different security situation for Europe, so it will be top of mind, but the strategic concept has to do more than that, and that is why the strategic concept will also take into consideration the Indo-Pacific, and that is why I stressed so much in my introduction just now how important this connection is to the countries in NATO. We have to have this global outlook, and we have to take into consideration all threats, also specifically here in the Indo-Pacific region. I think if you talk about China and what we heard this morning, I think of utmost importance is to have the dialogue, and that was why having the presentation this morning, but also having in another room a dialogue going on between China and the United States, being able to have these discussions, this exchange of views, trying to understand one another, is of course of utmost importance. Also for the European Union, as I said, the European Union is also a geopolitical player, and we're even more aware of this role now, and that is why we also value very much to have this dialogue with China. I was glad that the General was also clear on the war in Ukraine and condemning it. So the third thing I'd like to add is that if we talk about Cold War, and it was mentioned just now also in one of the questions, there is one big difference between the Cold War as we knew it at the time and the situation that is developing now. And I see all the threats, and we might have more of a regionalization of the world, being very much aware that we don't turn into protectionism, because that's going to cost us all, I think. But there is going to be some kind of more work towards regions, as we're seeing right now. But we do live in a globalized world. And that is why I mentioned the export of the grain from Ukraine, because it's not only about Ukraine. It's about how Ukraine and the war in Ukraine affects all of us, affects also the poorest countries in Africa, affects countries in this part of the world. Because if one harvest is lost, it will take years for us to recover from that.
Thank you very much. Just before I pass to the Minister of Defense, a reminder that he will speak in Korean, so to prepare yourselves for that. One point about deterrence, the IISS, when it was established, worked hard in the 1960s and 1970s to establish many of the principles of deterrence that then became part of the conventional strategic wisdom. And I think deterrence now probably needs to be reimagined, given the diversity of threats and the instruments by which those threats are implemented. One comment on Putin that might be relevant in this context. Putin is hypersensitive to perceived provocation, but then uses that known sensitivity to deter others from actually quite legitimate strategic action. But he's also hyper-responsive to perceived license, which means that if other powers say mainly what they won't do, That enlarges his maneuver space, which he then quickly exploits. So when one is trying to maintain an exercise of deterrence, it's important to continue to underline more the things that you might do rather than the things that you definitely won't. If that principal lesson of deterrence isn't continually learned, then of course deterrence will fail. Minister of Defense.
Thank you.
So there are multiple questions asked, and I'd like to respond to the two important questions. As Mr. John Shipman has said, he mentioned about nuclear threats by North Korea, and he said there are going to be a lot of those questions. However, one person had asked the question, not directly, but in the ballpark of that. I'll respond about North Korean nuclear threats and our efforts for North Korean denuclearization. The North Korean threats are currently very severe. They're in preparation for the 7th nuclear test. And on the larger scale, we assess that the preparation has been complete. So our first option would be to give our efforts to deter their possible conduction of nuclear tests, and we're doing this in an allied effort. And also, the next option would be to make sure that they can't use that technology after that. And so the ultimate goal is to denuclearize North Korea eventually. Our efforts for denuclearization of North Korea has been continued for decades, and has been centered around the international community, UN, and there is a 6-way conference, and also based on US, centered around US, through US DPRK summits. As such, we have made various efforts, and despite all that, North Korea still hasn't made its denuclearization. It hasn't made any progress in that aspect. Some people say that North Korea does not have any willingness to denuclearize, and can't we just give up? However, our government does not think that. When we talk about a will, it can always change. Therefore, we are continuing our efforts for denuclearization of North Korea in order to change the opinions and the mind of North Korea. We have 2 ways of doing that. First is a technical issue, and second is recognition issue by North Korea. The core problem of North Korean recognition of this issue, what we can say is that the cost of North Korea possessing these weapon systems is far outweighed by the benefit that North Korea can achieve by denuclearizing the same system. It's important that we guide North Koreans into thinking in such terms, and our government will take the initiative in pursuing that goal, and I believe it's something that the international community should follow along. And the new government of President Yoon has pledged to make his efforts for denuclearization of North Korea, and we mentioned the bold plan. That is, if North Korea shows concrete effort to make peace on the Korean Peninsula, and if it does achieve denuclearization, then our government or the international community, with the help of the international community, we will help North Korea become a prosperous country. That is the bold plan. So going forward, the Republic of Korea government will continue its effort, but I hope that this happens along with the international community. And the second question is our new government's Indo-Pacific strategies initiatives. And as for that, let's say that in the Indo-Pacific region, for the it's important that we uphold the rule-based international order and the peace, freedom, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region, and to assure the freedom of navigation and flight. That is our objective, and that is the objective that our government has in developing this Indo-Pacific strategy, although we do not have the specifics on our mind yet, and we will be able to tell the specifics in the future. That is the answer for the two questions. Thank you.
I think there was a question on Taiwan.
Yeah, I couldn't hear that question very well. Could you repeat again?
That might be technically difficult, but we'll come back to it maybe in the second round. First, we'll have 4 or 5 other questions and then return for the panel's concluding remarks before it ends. From Lebanon, Rim Momtaz. Rim.
Thank you, John. My question is to the Dutch Minister Ollongren, but also Lord Sedwill. I really wonder, you've mentioned now twice the importance of securing being able to get grain shipments out of Ukraine, and also how Europe has sort of drawn the right lessons from the Ukraine war and how that has made it a better partner for Asia. But how does European countries' failure to secure those grain shipments affect European countries' ability to provide effective security guarantees and reinsurances in Asia for countries, for example, that are facing similar threats down the line? Thank you.
Thank you very much. From the UK and also IISS, Henry Boyd.
Thank you, John. My question is also to Minister Ollongren and Lord Sedwill. Do you believe that European publics are now sufficiently...
Just speak a bit closer to the microphone.
Thank you. My apologies. Do you believe that European publics are now sufficiently aware of the global salience of Indo-Pacific security issues, or does more work need to be done in this area? Thank you.
And from Japan and IISS, Mariko Togashi.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. I have a question for Minister Lee. You've mentioned the importance of the U.S.-Japan ROK trilateral relationship, but while the Japan ROK relations have significant common interests, there have been setbacks from historical and territorial issues. Do you think the sense of urgency has reached the level to put aside the bilateral issues this time? And if so, how do you think we can continue this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mei Fong Noah Wang, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask the Korean minister about, since your president already stated that it's interest to take part of the Quad Plus engagement. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit about the Korean inspiration to contribute to this engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Chung-Min Lee, also of Korea.
My question is to Minister Ollongren from the Netherlands. Your government has earmarked 5 billion euros more for defense spending, and you will reach the 2% ceiling in the next couple of years. How sustainable is that for the longer term? Thank you.
And from Romania, but also from our IISS Europe office in Berlin, Simona Soare.
Thank you, John. My question goes to the two European speakers. On Friday, we've heard Prime Minister Kishida emphasize cooperation on emerging and disruptive technologies with regional partners. Yesterday, we've heard the same message echoed by Secretary Austin. And of course, we know both the European Union and NATO and your respective nations are invested in the development of advanced technologies, including for defense applications. I'm wondering if you can comment on what role do you think and what offer do you think your nations, NATO and the European Union, can make to Asian partners in this respect? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from France, Marianne Perron-Doise.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on maritime security. Minister Ollongren mentioned the mission of the frigate Evertseen in Indo-Pacific last year, and there was quite a lot of naval activities. I have in mind the deployment of a French submarine, the presence of a German frigate, and a lot of exercise. And my question is, do you think that EU would be able to maintain this level of presence, naval presence in the Indo-Pacific? And what can be the EU contribution to maritime security of the region?
Thank you very much. And from Japan, Chikako Weki.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chipman. I have a question to Minister Lee and also to Lord Selden. To Minister Lee, you mentioned about maintaining extended deterrence by the United States, and if you could elaborate on the Koreans' effort in concrete terms in how South Korea could enhance the extended deterrence of the United States. And another question sort of related, what kind of military capability would you envision to enhance through the better cooperation between Japan and ROK? To Dr. Selden, this might be a rather general question, but given that the world community have failed to deter the initial aggression of Russia, what is the priority, the top priority that we should be thinking of in deterring, preventing conflict in this region? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the Executive Director of IISS Asia, James Crabtree.
Thank you, John. A question to all three panelists, but Minister Ollongren in particular. We at the IISS were particular fans of the 2020 Indo-Pacific guidelines of the Netherlands, in particular page 9, bullet point 1, in which the document said that the Netherlands would engage at the appropriate level with strategic gatherings in the Indo-Pacific, specifically the Shangri-La dialogue. That being said, I wonder, could you address skepticism in this region that the Indo-Pacific strategies of Holland and other European countries will now be less viable in the aftermath of the resources required to address the war in Ukraine?
Thank you very much. And to I just missed someone there from Singapore. Chulani from Sri Lanka, you're on.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Lord Sedwill. In your remarks, you mentioned that environmental and climate change issues will be at the forefront in future conflicts. Submarine proliferation and undersea warfare contribute a lot to environmental issues in the ocean areas. So as a state which has its own submarine proliferation activities, I would like your comments on how do you suggest countries to balance between realizing their undersea warfare interests with protecting marine environment, and also how do you aspire to partner with small island states who are mostly affected by such activities? Thank you.
Thank you. And just for me as chair to provide tactical warning to our panelists, we'll take 2 more questions, and then I'll ask the Minister of Netherlands to respond first, Minister of Defense of Korea second, and Mark Sedwill third. So the next 2 questions, the first from France, Sébastien Faletti.
Good morning. It's a question for Mr. Lee, follow up on the deterrence toward North Korea. Your president mentioned with President Biden the importance of extended deterrence strengthening. In the future, would that entail the possibility of returning some US nuclear asset on the Korean Peninsula, or will you rule this out completely? And the second question is about your country's quest for a nuclear-propelled submarine. I know there's been discussion with US on this. Are you confident that you could get some progress on this with the current administration? Thank you.
And finally, Antoine Levesque.
Thank you, John. My question is to Lord Sedwill. I want to ask about the India-UK relationship. It's a relationship which has come quite a way forward in the last year or so, and there is now an established security pillar to that relationship. I do wonder what you think the outcome and the outlook of that pillar may be, and whether it is time to think of how India can contribute to European security as far as the UK conceives of it in the context of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Ollongren.
Thank you very much. Well, let me start by answering the last question that was addressed to me by your colleague about the Dutch Indo-Pacific strategy and the fact that we're actually living up to it, because, as mentioned in the strategy, we meant to be here at the appropriate level. Well, I hope that you find that this is the appropriate level. But on a more serious note, I think that we all have to be very aware that, yes, there is a war in Europe, and of course that's top of mind for us in all European countries. But it's also a wake-up call to threats across the globe. So it's a wake-up call that it's important to have an Indo-Pacific strategy, not only for us, but also for the European Union, and to be at these gatherings and to have the dialogue and to keep the dialogue going. Because I think one of the things that I take back when I go home again is the fact that I think almost every speaker, or perhaps every speaker here, mentioned international rule-based order. I think that is the basis. If we accept that, we have to remind one another of that, and we have to live up to it. And that is very important, and that is why I think it should not be less viable that we concentrate also on this region. I think we have to do even more, and that brings me to the other question about the Dutch increase in our defense budget spending, which is really a big step. It's plus 40% every year, structural. We will be at 2% at least in the coming years, 24, 25. After that, it depends also, of course, on economic growth, etc. Possibly the next government will have to take an extra step. But I mean, this is for us such a huge step in investing in our armed forces. I think that where we are now is simply not enough. So we have to invest in people, in their training. We have to invest in our stocks. We have to make sure that we have enough ammunition. And we have to invest in new technologies. And we have to build our armed forces for the future. And that is going to take time. But we're going to do this. Now, there's political commitment in the Netherlands, and there's not just a commitment for now. I think we've also learned there were times after the Cold War, there were reasons to reconsider and to adapt to the new situation. But if you look back now, I think there were countries that drew their lessons from 2014 in the annexation of the Crimea, for instance. And some other countries are increasing their budgets now, as we are doing. And I'm very proud of our military and the army that we have. But we want to make it better and stronger, and also a stronger partner within NATO and within the European Union. A few other questions, perhaps, if you allow me, John. The awareness in the EU, perhaps the same answer. The war in Ukraine has also opened our eyes in a certain sense that we knew that the threat was there, but that it actually materialized in the way that it did it's only one man's fault. I think the Secretary Austin said it yesterday. It's one man who decided to invade Ukraine. And if you ask me, why didn't you give security guarantees to Ukraine? Why aren't you able to secure the grain vessels that have to leave Ukraine now? Well, because of that. Because of the aggression of one man, one country that he is responsible for. So it's not a failure of the EU or anybody else. It's an unprovoked and illegal act of aggression and war that's put us in this situation. And in this situation, I think the Netherlands, the countries in Europe, NATO countries, and many more are doing what they can to help Ukraine with humanitarian aid, financial aid, and also military aid. And I think that is vital, because you cannot reward aggression. And it's also in the UN Charter, Article 51, that countries have the right to protect themselves. We have to respect territorial integrity and sovereignty. So is it enough? We have to continue our efforts. We have to continue our joint efforts. And that is exactly the plan that we are having. On emerging technologies, on cooperation, also in defense applications on emerging technology with partners in Asia, I think we are investing also, of course, in NATO and in the EU, exactly in these technologies. I mentioned cyber threats, I mentioned space as an important area where we have to do more, and where I think there is some extremely valuable knowledge in countries here in this region. So that's why that cooperation is so important to us. Maritime security, yes. Well, for us as a seafaring nation, and being aware of the importance of having the free access to our seas, yes, that's why I said the Everton was a success for us, but also a signal for me that this is what we need to do. So we need to join up, to be present here, and we are also talking to our European partners. So the answer is yes, that is exactly what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Lee.
Yes. 앞에 모니터에 2분 25초 남았는데 그 안에 끝.
So we have 2 minutes and 55 seconds left on the monitor. I'll try to answer all the questions in that time. First, I'd like to talk about ROC-Japan security cooperations. It really depends on who the target is and how to do it. The target is threats by North Korea of nuclear threats and missile threats. And this is where we are going to develop our security cooperation. As for the methods, within that range, we will have high-level cooperation or missile warning exercises or information sharing. And that is the way that we will develop the security cooperation between Republic of Korea and Japan, and also regarding Japan. Oh, as for deterrence, the question was about how Japan and Republic of Korea will cooperate in terms of deterrence. But deterring nuclear threats of North Korea is to develop based on the ROC-US alliance. That would be the optimal option. And question from France was, would it be possible for U.S. nuclear capacity to be deployed on the Korean Peninsula? However, nobody wants deployment of nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. Nobody in the country, any country, or anyone from the international community will want that, and that would be my answer. Thank you.
Give 1 or 2 minutes to Mark Sedwill, an extra minute perhaps, because I want to ask him a question. Reem Momtaz asked earlier about the fact the Black Sea is closed, and as the Minister said, the Black Sea is closed because of Putin's actions. But deterrence and defense also rather depend on the level of risk that you're willing to undertake. The UK Navy last year actually conducted a FONOPS operation in the Black Sea. Now the Black Sea is closed. It would have been strategically possible for a government or a number of governments, when they saw Russian ships shooting at civilians from the Black Sea, to cite the responsibility of protect doctrine and say, if ships are in the Black Sea and international waters killing civilians, we will sink them. It would have been an escalation, but in international waters, not against Russian territory, and for a humanitarian goal. Having not done that, should one consider a level of risk, given the extraordinary sufferings in the global south from the lack of grain that they are receiving because of the blockade, forcibly to reopen the Black Sea? Mark.
Well, you've just made that question even harder, John. So like you, I have the luxury of not being in government, so I'm not speaking for the British government here, but I essentially agree with your point. I said earlier in response to a question that the Article 5 guarantee applies to NATO nations, and that threshold, we've made clear, would trigger a military response by NATO were Russia to breach NATO territory. I've also said in another forum that I think a second threshold that should provoke that same response would be the use of chemical or nuclear weapons, even within the territory of Ukraine. That has to be a second threshold where, at least, to pick up your language, Putin cannot count on the absence of a military response. And I think the same goes for the Black Sea and maintaining the freedom of navigation, as you say, in international waters. I think we should be willing to, I'm at the hawkish end on this, I think we should be willing to engage in if necessary, military operations in order to maintain freedom of navigation and indeed, in this case, the openness of grain supplies. We have to recognize that there are risks to that, but there are risks to all of this. And I think we should be taking a more robust approach on that, and that's what I'd be advocating were I still within government. I think that goes to the various questions. I won't answer them individually because we're short of time, about deterrence more generally. How does what happens in Ukraine affect other nations that are threatened elsewhere, including in this region, and what are the lessons? Well, Putin miscalculated. I mean, we've all been clear, this was his decision, but he did not expect this to turn out the way it has. He clearly expected that this was going to be a swift and decisive victory for Russia, and it hasn't been. And why is that? Well, one, he overestimated the capability of his own forces. Second, he underestimated the Western response and actually how much capability we'd provided to Ukraine over the previous few years. And he clearly underestimated Ukrainian fighting spirit. And so the lessons for elsewhere are that we need to help other nations who feel themselves threatened by a more powerful neighbor to equip themselves with the capability, but also the morale to demonstrate that they're going to be a very, very hard challenge should a more powerful neighbor seek to breach their sovereignty and carry out an act of an aggression. And I think we should, John, as you've suggested, we should be very careful of saying what we won't do. We should, at the very least, leave in the minds of any potential aggressor the possibility that there will be military action by external powers, at least if certain boundaries, the use of weapons of mass destruction, impeding sea lanes, etc., are crossed. And you know, I think our doctrines should develop in that way. Just very briefly on a couple of the other points that came up. NATO is, as we've both said actually, a defensive alliance. It's fundamentally North Atlantic, clues in the name. But let's not forget, land, sea and air, that is our territorial domains, space, cyberspace and the information space aren't. And so the NATO strategic concept needs to be updated for recognizing that not every threat that may come at us in those new domains, and cyberspace is now as much a place where business is done and activity is conducted and so on, as real life, if you like, that we need to be, NATO needs to have a role in defending its members against threats in those areas from wherever they might come, not just in its own territory. Very briefly on maritime protection, I mean, there isn't really time to go into the answer, but clearly I mean, the UK has tried to support small island states, including through the COP process, because they're particularly vulnerable to climate change. They also need support in the responsible management of their exclusive economic zones, including, I'm a scuba diver, so including their coral reefs, and we do need to make sure that those are properly protected, whether it's trade or security operations, for that matter. And I think UK-India, India has a critical role to play, in particular in this region. I don't think they would aspire to be playing a direct role in European security, but if they can play a significant role in enhancing the security of this region, we in Europe, those in North America, Africa, elsewhere will benefit.
Thank you very much. We've had an excellent detailed expression of the interdependencies between the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific theaters. Could you please join me in thanking our three speakers for their presentations, answer to questions?
Thank you.